Okay, ready to dive into something pretty fascinating.
I am.
All right, so we are exploring this book by Antonio Damasio, Self Comes to Mind, Constructing the Conscious Brain.
Okay.
And you sent this over to me, and it is dense.
Yeah.
But it's incredible.
It is. It's very thought-provoking.
It really is.
Yeah.
And I think that one of the things that stood out to me is this idea of the brain as like a master map maker.
Yeah.
And not just a map maker, like, we think about maps, but mapping every single experience, every single thing that we encounter.
And relating it all together, too, right?
Yeah.
It's not just like these things exist independently. He's really making the point that it's all these things in relation to one another.
That's our own inner Google Maps.
Yeah.
But for our entire, mental existence.
Yeah, how we experience the world, which I think is a really cool way to think about it.
So how does that even work?
Right.
Like, how does our brain take something like, we look out and I see this.
Right.
How does it turn into that?
Right. So we've got to get down into a little bit of the biology and the structure here.
Okay.
So you've got light coming in through your eyes, right? And it hits the back of your eye on the retina.
Okay.
And that retina is already structured kind of like a grid, if you think about the pixels in your phone camera.
All right.
Each pixel is a little sensor that's picking up light or color or however your phone's working.
Right.
And so you've got this grid and light hits it in a particular pattern.
Okay.
And so that pattern is basically a map of the light information that's coming in.
So our eye is
It's like the initial kind of
right.
Yeah, it's taking the picture.
It's taking the picture in a sense.
It's taking the picture.
And then it's sending that information to the brain.
That information then gets sent to the back of your brain, to the visual cortex, which is where a lot of the visual processing happens.
Okay.
And it's not just a random jumble of light information. It's maintaining the spatial relationships.
Oh, wow.
Between all of those little pixels of light that are activated on your retina.
So it's still...
It's like a map.
A map.
Yeah, it's maintaining that structure.
That's the thing about...
As the information gets relayed through the optic nerve and all the way to the back of your brain.
Wow.
It's really fascinating how that works.
So it's like a one-to-one.
Kind of, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not exact, obviously, because it's biology and it's messy. Right. But it's maintaining those spatial relationships. So that's how you get a coherent image.
Wow.
Instead of just random flashes of light.
That's incredible.
So that's vision, but that's just one sense, right? We've got all these other senses too.
Yeah. How does that work with something like sound?
Sound is really interesting.
Okay.
So deep inside your ear is a structure called the cochlea.
The cochlea.
The cochlea, and it's this spiral-shaped, fluid-filled tube.
Oh, wow.
Okay, and inside that tube are thousands of tiny little hair cells.
Hair cells.
Hair cells. And they're kind of lined up along the length of this tube.
Okay.
And what's really cool is that each of those hair cells is tuned to a specific frequency of sound.
Oh, yeah.
It's like having a little graphic equalizer built into your ear.
That's incredible.
Isn't that wild?
Like different frequencies,
yeah.
different
parts of that cochlea vibrate.
Oh my gosh.
So when sound waves come into your ear, they're causing vibrations in the air, and those vibrations travel through your ear canal and they hit your eardrum, and then they get translated into vibrations in this fluid.
Okay.
In the cochlea.
Okay.
And depending on the frequency of the sound wave, different parts of that cochlea are going to vibrate more.
Oh, wow.
And that's how we
that is incredible.
Distinguish different pitches.
Okay.
And then those vibrations get translated into electrical signals that the brain can understand.
So it's going from vibration to
electrical activity.
Electrical activity to a map in the brain.
Yeah. And so because you have those different hair cells lined up along the cochlea, the brain is getting information about, okay, this frequency is vibrating here.
Right.
And this frequency is vibrating here.
Wow.
So it's like a tonotopic map.
A tonotopic.
Yeah, it's a map of tones, basically.
Wow, that's so cool.
Isn't that wild?
It's like our brains are literally creating these
representations
of sound.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so we've got all these maps happening.
Yeah.
For all of our senses.
For everything we experience.
What's the point?
Right. So Damasio's argument, and this is where it gets really interesting, is that these maps, these neural representations of everything we experience, are our minds. Yeah, it's not like there's this separate mind floating around. It's not these patterns of neural activity of all these different senses coming together. That is what we experience as our minds.
Yeah. So it's like, instead of thinking of the mind as this thing out there. It's more like this constantly unfolding movie.
Yes.
Projected onto the structure of our brains.
I love that analogy. That's a really good way to think about it.
It's like the movie's playing.
Yeah.
But the movie is.
It's your experience.
Your experience.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
And this mind movie, it's not just passive, right? Like, we're not just recording everything around us. Our brains are constantly filtering and prioritizing information.
Well, that makes sense.
Right.
Because if we were paying attention to every single thing,
we would be totally overwhelmed.
It'd be impossible to function.
Exactly.
Right.
So our brains have evolved these mechanisms to say, okay, what's important here? What do we need to pay attention to?
So how does our brain know what to prioritize?
So a lot of it comes down to survival instincts, right?
Right.
Things that are potentially dangerous or rewarding, those are going to get our attention.
Okay.
But a lot of it also comes down to our past experiences.
Okay.
What we've learned is important or meaningful.
So it's like our brains are taking
Yeah.
our evolutionary history,
Yes.
our personal experiences,
Blending it all together.
and creating this like unique
Your own personal mind movie.
mind movie. Exactly.
That's shaped by all of those factors.
That's incredible.
And that's actually why two people can witness the same event and have completely different interpretations of it.
Right, because their brains are prioritizing different information.
Exactly. They're creating different maps of that experience based on their own unique perspectives and values.
It's like we're all living in our own little worlds.
In a way, yeah, we are all the centers of our own universes.
Okay, so we've got these maps. We've got this prioritizing happening.
Yeah.
And this is where, I guess, consciousness comes in.
Right, because the big question is, okay, so how do we go from these maps to this feeling of awareness of being a self?
Right.
And this is where Damasio kind of shakes things up a little bit.
Okay.
Because for a long time, the prevailing view in neuroscience was that consciousness was primarily located in the cerebral cortex.
The cerebral cortex being like the outer layer of the brain.
Exactly, the wrinkly part that we all think of when we think of a brain.
Right.
And while the cortex is definitely important for higher level thinking and decision making,
Okay.
Damasio argues that it's not the whole story.
Okay. So what else is involved?
He points to the brainstem.
The brainstem.
Yeah.
Which is
a much older part of the brain.
right. It's like the more primitive
Part of the brain.
That's responsible for basic bodily functions like breathing and heart rate.
Right.
Damasio argues that it also plays a crucial role in consciousness.
Okay, that's fascinating because you wouldn't think about something like breathing
Right.
being connected to consciousness.
It seems so basic.
Right.
But Damasio's argument is that the brainstem is where our most basic feelings originate.
Okay.
Things like pain, pleasure, hunger, thirst.
So before we're even conscious of like, oh, I'm hungry,
Exactly.
our brainstem is already sending out those signals.
It's already saying, hey, we need food.
Wow.
And he uses this really interesting example to illustrate this point.
Okay.
He talks about children born without a cerebral cortex, a condition called hydranencephaly. Hydranencephaly?
Yeah.
Without a cerebral cortex?
It's a very rare and serious condition.
Okay.
But incredibly, these children can still exhibit basic awareness and emotions. They respond to touch, they smile, they show preferences for certain people or things.
So even without that outer layer of the brain,
Yeah.
they're still experiencing...
They're still having some basic level of experience, which suggests that consciousness isn't solely located in the cortex,
Yeah.
that there's something more fundamental going on.
Wow, that's incredible.
And to make things even more interesting, Damasio introduces another brain region that he thinks plays a key role,
Okay.
the superior colliculus.
The superior colliculus.
Yeah, it's a mouthful.
It is a mouthful. What is that?
So the superior colliculus is a structure in the brainstem that acts like a central hub for sensory information.
Okay.
It receives input from vision, hearing, touch, and it integrates all of that information into a single map of what's going on around us.
So it's like the cortex has different areas for different senses.
Right?
The superior colliculus is getting it all at once.
It's like a multisensory integration center.
Oh, wow.
And Damasio suggests that this might be a really primitive form of awareness.
Okay.
Think about a lizard catching a fly.
Okay.
It's not thinking about it in any conscious way,
Right.
but its superior colliculus is coordinating that action,
Wow.
integrating the visual information about the fly with the sensory information about its own body position.
That's incredible.
So even in creatures with much simpler brains than ours,
Yeah.
this region is playing a really important role.
So it's like this really ancient part of our brain
Yeah.
that's still so relevant
You did,
to how we experience the world.
It's like a fundamental building block of awareness.
Wow, this is blowing my mind.
Yeah.
It's incredible to think about, right? Like all of this is going on beneath the surface.
Right, and we're only just scratching the surface here.
Exactly, and we haven't even gotten to like, you know, memories, emotions.
Like a whole other can of worms.
Right.
We could do a whole deep dive just on memory and how that gets incorporated into all of this.
But I think that it's just incredible to think that like all of this is going on.
Yeah, it's mind-boggling.
Every second of every day.
All the time.
And we're just like walking around.
Totally unaware.
For the most part, yeah.
Yeah, going to the grocery store. And yet, all of this complexity is what allows us to do all of those things.
That's incredible.
To appreciate a beautiful sunset, to have a conversation,
Right.
to even be aware of ourselves as individuals.
It kind of makes you think, though, if like our brains are creating all of this.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
how much of what we're experiencing is actually real?
That's the big question, isn't it? Like,
Right.
what is reality?
Is it just all in our heads?
To some extent, I think Damasio would argue that it is that our brains are constructing our reality based on all of these maps and these interpretations and these past experiences.
So it's not to say that there's not an objective reality out there.
Right.
But
we don't have direct access to it.
we're experiencing it
Yeah.
through this filter.
Through the filter of our brains.
Of our own brains.
Exactly. Which I think is kind of a beautiful thing in a way.
It is beautiful.
It's like we each have our own unique perspective, our
Yeah.
own unique way of seeing the world.
And I think that that's kind of what makes life interesting, right?
It does.
Like if we all experienced reality in the exact same way,
Yeah. It would be pretty boring.
it would be really boring.
We wouldn't have art. We wouldn't have music.
We wouldn't have anything to talk about.
Exactly.
This has been amazing.
It's been fun.
I'm so glad that you sent this over to me
Yeah, it's a good one.
because this is really like thought-provoking.
It is. It makes you think about things differently.
Differently.
Yeah,
So I love that. And I think we need more of that in our world.
absolutely.
So thank you
Thank you.
for joining us on this deep dive.
It's been a pleasure.
And thank you to everyone out there for listening. And we'll see you at the next one.